Um, so, uh, yeah, let me just reveal my heart. So it's hard to do this for me, right? A little bit like that movie with Mel Brooks where the psychoanalyst is trying to talk sexuality and there's a kid in the audience. So he uses like Yiddish words so the child won't be bombarded by sexual terms. I don't know if you guys remember that movie. Anyway, so it reminds me of that. If you go from text work where there's no talk really of sexuality to this, yeah, so kind of makes me blush, I guess, that's lack of a better word. I have not taught this for about 5 years. And the reason why is it's really hard to do in some ways. Some people asked me, is this mainly addressed to men? So if you read the description, then the answer is yes. And the main reason is because men created the problem, according to some, and men have to fix it. So in a certain sense, yeah, I'll try to spell the problem out. I hope no one thinks I'm talking to them per se. And in another sense, yeah, I'm talking to all of us because this is really important, in my opinion. So I started my journey in about 2003. I met a spiritual teacher and I noticed I went through this very severe healing path where I had this very drastic body work done on me. It's reminiscent of the style of the Maoris. So the healer puts elbows in your neck. And so the basic thing is your body carries all these memories or damage that you create. And it's called stepping. It's like Lomi Lomi, but it's a step deeper. The Maoris do it in a super aggressive way, all in one day. And this teacher I had studied with the Maori and then turned it into a new art. And the reason why is she saw that when the Maoris stepped on you, you would lose all these issues that you had, past life and everything. But after the session was over, a day later, a week later, you would bring all the negative energy back because you weren't ready to release it. So Noah, the lady I worked with, noticed, wait, why is it that all these people bring the energy back that they just released? And the idea is they're not bringing in a substitute. So let's say, for example, you were abused as a kid, someone hit you and you shrink your neck whenever someone aggressive walks into the room, and then you develop this tension around your neck, and then some body worker comes and releases that tension, right? So they release the tension, but you haven't substituted it with anything. So you bring that issue back energetically. And she tried to figure out, how do you do it so people don't keep repeating the pattern? I'm sorry, is this loud enough? I guess I should probably put on my headphones. Does that work? Can everybody hear me? Yeah, okay. So going back to the story, while I was working with her, I noticed that she was a pretty advanced person. And I said, what's one way to like ennoble sexuality? And she's like, well, I'm glad you asked. And that's when my journey started. And the journey was an attempt to do several things at once, to engage in sexuality in a new way, and to have someone correct you when you're wrong. You understand? Like when you make a mistake. So if you just read a book and you go about it on your own, a lot of times there's no correction. There's no one supporting you. And I had that. Not only was I on a healing journey, including master cleanses and all of the above, forgiveness sheets and all of these things, but as I was also being taught how to cultivate a different type of male energy. And so this journey, I guess, is still going on, but the main part of the journey was about from 2005 to about 2012.
So that's kind of what I'm going to touch on. It's important, and the reason why it's important is because there's a lot of misinformation. So I've read all the tantric teachers and everything that's out there, and there's some good stuff, but it's almost never really based on certain precedents or in love. And I'll explain that as we go on. So right now, there's really no competition in the realm of ideas of sexuality. And it's problematic because there are certain stages that you will reach that you know you've reached, and it's quite an achievement. And one of them is to get out of your head and into your heart. And this is a big jump, and you'll know you're there because it will feel like someone's grabbing your liver and pulling on it. And I'm bringing that up as kind of your first, if you haven't reached that stage of your liver pulling and clearing, you haven't gotten out of your head. And you won't find that in any of those books. And so that's kind of one of the goals that I'm going to focus on in today's lecture is how to really have not like benchmarks, but proof that you're actually transforming. I'm going to use Barry Long's work because it's something that is good and is accessible, that you can study and practice immediately. It's something that I practiced as a way of, when I was working with my teacher, she didn't tell me exactly what to do. She just gave me general guidelines and I would check in. So it's not like I got some kind of plan. I had to experiment, figure out, ask questions. It was my questions that allowed me to enter into a new space. But had I no curiosity, it wouldn't have worked. There's no plan. So what I do is I give you a little bit of what Barry Long says, and then the Chinese or Taoist tradition. They're two completely different ways, but if you follow the basic idea of getting out of your head and into your heart, they both work, if that makes sense. If you don't know Barry Long, I'll start with him. Barry Long was a Australian spiritual teacher, and he gave a series of lectures, and they became a little book and a DVD, which is also on YouTube. He passed away, and when you first encounter his work, he's a little bit harsh, and he's very harsh on men. And what his work is a little bit like reading the Quran. You know, the Quran's not like chronological, everything's mixed around, and so is his lectures. So when you read it, it's hard to have a clear picture of like what, how, why, who. And his basic thesis is this. Men in today's society are sexually obsessed, and women are basically depressed and alienated. And whatever reasons people try to give to explain that, it goes back way back in history, before there was the linear time that we have today. So Barry's argument that once upon a time, people lived a timeless existence, and lovemaking was something that was cultivated. And the lovemaking required that the man fill his body with enough love to open up the feminine powers. So that was the key to making this work. And he talks about that if you go back in history, you see couples generating this ginormous golden aura. And he said with time, with the development of linear time and the busy civilization, this got lost. So way back in prior incarnations, we understood this, and sexuality was a source of regeneration. So that's kind of his starting point. And then he goes on to say, as society became busy, men forgot how to access the power in women, how to truly make love. And thus the title of his book, if you get it, is Making Love. And he says, if we're going to solve this whole problem, the male has to change his relationship to women. And so right now, men are in a money relationship, right? They can hang money over a woman's head with the children. So there's all these power issues that crept in. And then women also transformed over time, becoming objects of stimulation. And so that's basically what we have today in extreme in our pornography culture. So women lost their kind of divine inspiration symbol or meaning, and now they became ways of titillating men. And that was basically forced upon them. And then what happened was all of the benefits from this original sexuality got lost. And in today's sexuality has been reduced to orgasm chasing. Is that a familiar concept for everybody? So the best you can do is have an orgasm in sex, right? The movies reinforce that. And Barry Long is like, an orgasm has nothing to do. It's not even the beginning. And so it's a complete radical change in thinking that when love is brought into the constellation, we no longer, we transcend all of the things that we celebrate today in sexuality. The goal, says Barry, is to get out of imagination. So when you're with a person, what blocks us most is we bring our past with us. So women read romance novels, men obsessed with sex, often become easily aroused. And Barry's very clear. He says the modern penis, or the penis for the last couple thousand years, is just excitable. It's this excitable organ, and that's not its function. So Barry says this excitable penis is everywhere, always active, always imagining, even when it's has nothing to do. And that was brought to the woman. And the woman, instead of being penetrated by this amazing phallic energy, is now being penetrated by an excitable, weak, unloving man. And thereby woman's nature and her sexual nature became corrupt. So it's a great story, right? So all of the excuse making, Barry says, sexual dysfunction, inability to be intimate, all of that has to change. And there's only one way to change that, and that is for the man to bring ever more or larger quantities of love into his physical body. And so what Barry says is that the first stage is to have sexuality that is not based in excitement. So when he actually rolls up his sleeves and he gives suggestions, the man is to enter the woman in a flaccid state. And then the question is, well, what do you do now? So now the penis is, a soft penis is in this vagina. Where's the fun? And so what Barry says is that as the man gets out of his imagination, he starts to bring in love until it fills his penis, not with excitement, but with love. And if the man can get an erection out of love and not out of excitement, that's the beginnings of when the woman's powers can be accessed. It's a little too graphic for what is it, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Um, any questions so far? Is the thesis clear?
Yeah, I would say so. I think it's pretty well described.
Okay.
And by the way,
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like it makes complete sense.
Yeah. The next thing, of course, is to try it. So not to get right now into my own personal experience, it does take a lot. You have to sit. So one way Barry recommends, sit there for half an hour, quietly, in this absolute quiet with your partner, naked, no game playing, no titillating, no dirty talking. Just sit there and allow your body to do what it can do naturally, which is bring in love. So let's see. One of the things Barry says is that in order to pull this off, you have to basically make love every day. And he says, even if you can't, you have a busy schedule, you can't make excuses. And he said, the commitment to this higher path really requires that you force yourself to show up, because for now, our bodies are so not used to making love in that way, right? So it is a training. It could take some people a week. It could take some people 20 years. So he's pretty clear that this is a path. If it were so easy, everyone would have done it.
So he's saying that every this is how people used to make love or have sex.
Yes, because when mankind was not in their head, let's say, so for example, if you take, let's say, your typical girl in America who's a virgin, she's thinking about her first time, right? And out of that first time, then they read literature on it, like Judy Blume books or something like that. And then their head is filled with all these expectations. And Barry said, that's ridiculous. A woman's body is so perfect in all of its spiritual capacities that if a man didn't penetrate her with this hardened, excited penis, she wouldn't have all the pain she has, right? She wouldn't have all this apprehension. There wouldn't be all this confusion. The confusion comes because men are not loving. That our bodies are actually designed to do what our ancestors did. For example, in Persia was supposedly the last truly tantric culture. So there's these there's not so much art historical things, but that was one of the last places that carried on this tradition.
Well, it's kind of interesting because I remember on a urology rotation, the urologist was talking with this man. I can't remember if the woman was there as well or not, but the guy was there, and the guy was talking about he had erectile dysfunction, like major, like he just couldn't get an erection at all, and that's a big thing in urology, obviously. And he was talking about, I still, have sex with my wife, and the urologist goes, "Oh, you mean stuffing?" And the guy was like, "Yeah," and I was like, "Well, that's a thing." So stuffing must have been a thing even before erectile dysfunction.
What is, say that again? Stuffing?
So, I mean, how is stuffing? I mean, is you stuff a flaccid penis into a vagina?
Oh, well, according to Barry Long, that's the solution to the problem. He says basically the reason why men have erectile dysfunction, one of the reasons, is because there is no love there. And that if they would do that and they would allow the healing energies that are already present in the vagina and the penis, that they would not, like I have friends that buy hormones, testosterone, because it says it, it gives them a little edge in the bed or something like that. That's exactly what Barry's talking about. And my teacher, she's like, yeah, keep doing that. That's really great. It's not solving the problem. The problem is a lack of love in the male body. If the male body were permeated by love, then the penis and vagina would start working on their own. In other words, their powers would be activated, and I can attest to this, what ends up happening is they take over. You're no longer in control. So they can do things that you didn't know they could do. And so Barry Long's promise is, if you keep showing up as a man in as loving as a condition as possible, your penis and vagina will take over. And then he says, what about foreplay? And so Barry is against titillating foreplay, but he says, if you're getting to the point where the male body is actually really filled with love, when he touches the woman or vice versa, there's another type of energy present. It's not a hungry, desperate, but it's a activating energy. So now he points out in his book, for example, that the breasts become activated. All of the sudden, a whole new level of awareness and pleasure comes out. That's not simply a normal sexual pleasure. It's the intensity is incredible. So I can describe this from my own experiences, that as you start, it's like kind of like you're just kind of waiting and saying, when is the love energy going to flow? But once it starts to flow, you don't know what to do, because you're not used to having that much love in your body. You start to feel really good. And I'll talk about the consequences at the end of the lecture when that happens. Let me see. One of Barry's main theses is this, that man's authority, and I'm not simply talking biblically, over woman is justified if he's loving and can access her powers. Otherwise, he remains in this kind of dominant position, but not authority position, which is one of protecting the woman. So now the one is more of an exploitive position. And he uses the word authority, which I thought was interesting. Man's authority is only justified to the degree that he's filled with love. And then from there, he has a whole nother role in society that he did not know. So the ultimate outcome of a loving penis or a loving man is that he has a different type of power in society. It's his rightful power, the one he was born to have. And so you could imagine there's just so many ways to get lost, and then et cetera, et cetera. So if you do decide to listen to him, you might be a little bit turned off by his harsh judgments on men. But the intention, I think, is pure. Maybe that is a good place to stop with Barry Long. So in kind of a summary, the sex obsession that men have, the chronic pornography, everything else that our society suffers from, can only find its like ennoblement and fulfillment in regular intercourse that's loving. That's his conclusion, that his model, his archetype of the new man is someone who's always interested in his wife. And they both push each other to create that golden aura that we once had in past years. And to repeat, there's no one right way to do it, but what Barry says is you start by sitting quietly in soft penetration and allowing the organs to do what they were meant to do. Good. Any questions about Barry and his teaching? Okay, good. I'll go on to the next one.
I'm sorry, I had a question. Does he offer like any specific techniques in the book as to how to start the whole thing off?
Well, other than the soft penetration, no. He gives you a list of what not to do, which is basically everything that's recommended by every sex therapist in California, right? Um, it, it's just a matter of getting out of your head, starting sober and unaroused, and allowing love to take over, and trusting that your organs will naturally know what to do. So one thing he does say, so let's say, this is my experience. So in the beginning, you're waiting, and then he, of course, recommends you probably might need lubricants or something like that. And then he says, as you're waiting, pick a time, half an hour of just sitting with each other intimately, something like that. And then he says, if that doesn't, like, if you're not seeing shooting stars, or if you're not feeling your body kind of being filled with love, go back to your lovemaking as you knew it. So that's the middle ground. He says at least spend that half an hour or 20 minutes in that silence, allowing your organs to grow, allowing the love to grow. Because, yeah, like I said, it was so easy, everyone would do it. But what he seems to basically just reverse the formula. Don't do foreplay, go into coitus and wait. And then after that, everything that you used to do now has the magic of love. So the man's hands become magical, the mouth becomes magical. So let's say, I don't know, you used to be like really aggressive into tongue kissing, whatever. So Barry would be like, that's just a little penis that's super aroused and aggressive. That's not love. So when he's saying, when you bring love into your touch, into your organs, even into, let's say, oral sex, all of those are ennobled. Something else happens that you're not expecting. So, for example, this is my experience. He doesn't write about it in detail, but during penetration, soft penetration, you will actually feel your penis going all the way up into her body soft, which is a impossibility. So how does that happen? How does a soft penis erect itself and go? It feels like a vacuum inside the woman. So those are the type of things. Or it changes the quality of the walls of the vagina or the penis, and you're no longer moving, and it's moving by itself. Those are proofs of, there's also, I don't know, I guess it's funny, I'm still shy. There's something also called a lock. So what ends up happening, if the woman is completely relaxed and filled with love, her vagina actually clamps down on the penis and you can't move. So all of these things are signs that the woman is becoming more and more filled with love, more and more relaxed, more and more open to those higher energies. Or she goes into another space. So you may just start from, little inklings, and then it builds up to these higher experiences until, well, I'll go into that later, till sometimes you have to take a break and you both throw up because now you're releasing. So remember the topic of this lecture was sexuality as a healing path. So what you're actually doing is, as you bring love into your system is cleaning you out. And where you have anger, sadness, confusion, past life, junk, that can be expressed by throwing up, by being angry, all sorts of symptoms, pains, bodily shaking, where your whole body starts to shake. And you get scared because it looks like your partner's in convulsions, right? Or they look like they smoked, like, a lot of weed. And so you don't know what's going on here. So Barry's kind of giving you the groundwork to prepare for that, but he doesn't go into detail, but he does give you at least the starting tips so you can get there. I hope that answers your question. Any other questions about Barry? Good. let's just jump into the Chinese. Is anybody here already familiar with Taoism on some level? A little bit? Okay, I'll give you the short version. The long version is very complicated and it doesn't need to be. So you know the symbol, like the Taoist symbol, right? And you have yin and yang. And so yin is the female principle and yang is the male. The female principle is yielding like water. And the male principle, let's see, what's a good word for that? It's not the opposite of yielding, but maybe it's resistant. So that's always your starting point. And the yin is water and the yang is fire. And so the Chinese system, although old, is pretty wise. And the Chinese basically, they want to keep everything in movement. So when you understand Taoist things, the worst thing you can be is static. So they have 4 seasons, and you have constellations, and you have signs of the year, and you're trying to optimize your energies based on the seasons. So you should eat a certain way in autumn and a certain way in winter, etc., etc. You should do this on a full moon. You shouldn't do this on a full moon. So their entire thinking is kind of like surfing, where every day you're watching out for different rocks and constellations, and you're trying to be in harmony. For the male and female, the Tao, right? The Tao is really kind of like a wave. And the question is, how do you keep optimizing your existence? And so what they start with is, so there's the threefold Tao is health, sex, and longevity. These are their values. So health includes everything dealing with the body, and the bodily essence is called Jing. So Jing runs through your blood, it's your hormones, it's in the substances like heavy fluids in your body. And then you have your Qi, which you guys know, right? And then your spirit, which is your Shen. So you have this kind of growth. And everything you do supports this. So when you choose something to eat, you're doing it based on the season of the year, your body type, and the purpose is to enhance your energy, always. So if you have a certain type of sickness, you would eat a certain type of meat. You would want to eat foods that clear out your bowels quickly, right? So what's the opposite of Tao is stagnation. So from this point of view, they view sexuality not as something, sexuality has to be rhythmic. So normally, let's say in Western thinking, you have a sexual act. In Taoist thinking, you're basically engaged in it as often as possible, like eating. So for the Taoists, the Chinese Taoists, there was no moral judgment about sexuality. It was a health judgment. What is the healthiest way to have sex? The joke or the distortion of that is Chinese eating rhino horns. Why do they eat rhino horns, right? Because they think it gives them a sexual edge. But traditionally, that's not what went on, because there are many ways to take care of your body. So for the Chinese, the first one is food. Then there's breathing. And then you have cleansing, stretching, meditation, and pressure points. These are ways to keep your energy flowing, because what's the value? The value here is movement, energetic movement. What's the opposite? Stagnation. So keep that in mind. It's a completely different worldview. So for the Taoist, what is the main obstacle in sexuality being done consistently? Like, what ruins your sexuality usually? What cuts the sexual act short? And this is important to say very clearly, right? So the sexual act is cut short by ejaculation. So what happens in the Taoist model? If the male ejaculates, he loses Jing. Jing is the same substance that's in your sperm as is your brain chemistry, basically. So the Taoist really believes that if you dissipate your sperm, that you're actually making yourself stupid at the same time. And they have recommendations. For example, if you're a young man, you're allowed to orgasm maybe several times a week. And for every 10 years, you cut that down by 50%. So if you're 60 years old, you're allowed to orgasm maybe once every 3 months, and then go from there. So
getting stupid when you ejaculate, you sure that comes from the Tao, or does that come from Seinfeld?
Well, that's what,
remember that episode?
I forget. No, I watched
George Costanza doesn't have sex, and he like turns into a genius. And he's like,
yes.
He's like reading all these textbooks, and he's like, of course, absolute zero. And then he's going to give a lecture to some kids because he's so smart, but then he ends up having sex with somebody, and he starts acting like a moron again.
Well, see, they're not that extreme, right? But what they are saying is that you need to cut down, and you're cutting down, number one, to take care of your partner. So the Taoist has a different attitude towards women than, let's say, Western or other Semitic people, right? So it's not that you're never supposed to orgasm as a man, but you're supposed to do it less to preserve your jinn, and then to breathe your jinn up to your mind. So the central act is semen retention. So the woman and men participate in the man's semen retention. And so what you would do if you're overly excited during sex and you're about to orgasm, the Taoists would say, slowly separate, tighten your sphincter muscle, right, your ass, and then breathe the pressure up through your spine, something like that. And then the woman would help by holding the man's penis during this operation and making sure he learns to control his orgasm. And so in the beginning, it's a very penis-centered activity. The woman is teaching him not to become overexcited. In the meantime, you're changing your diet. You're doing deep breathing. You're doing meditation. Because what's the goal here? For the Taoist, you have a physical body that everybody can see. And then you have your chi body. And then you have your shen, which is your spirit body, which they believe is just a little bit outside of your aura. And the goal here is to intensify the shen by supporting the jing and the qi. And there are 4 types of qi. The first type of qi is the primordial. So what is the primordial qi? Has anybody heard of that before? That means that everybody, whether it's true or not, is that every person comes with a certain battery. And when that battery runs out, you're dead. So the Chinese, I don't know if they said this to their fellow men just so they would stop having sex all the time or whatever, but they said, if you come too much, you're going to steal from your primordial chi, and your life is going to end early. So everybody's given a certain battery, and that's called the Wan Chi. That's your first type of Chi. Your second type of Chi is your Yang Chi. And your Yang Chi you get from deep breathing or practicing Taoist sex. So that's a more aggressive, fiery Chi. So that's so you're trying to generate. So the primordial Chi you're trying to save so you live a long time. The Yang Chi you're generating through sex and breathing exercises. And then there's a Yin Chi you get from food. So everything that the Taoist does is trying to feed their energy system. So when you pick those chips and you eat them, the Taoist gets a headache. He says, why don't you eat some raw vegetables? Why don't you have this elixir tea that stimulates your liver? So the Chinese don't just drink a tea, they're drinking a liver tea or some organ balancing tea. So that's why their herbal stores are so filled with different things. It's all a question, of course, is whether they work, right? And the final type of Qi, Yang, Yin, Wan. Oh, the final type of Qi, I think it's Yi, but I forget now, is the protection on your skin. So let's just call it skin Qi. And that's why you see them walking through the mountains sometimes, going in nature, absorbing Qi from around them. They believe it energizes. So you have four directions.
I think it's called Wei Qi. Isn't that called Wei Qi?
Yes. No, you're right. It's Wei. Thank you. Awesome. So you're always trying to build these Qis because you're building your Shen body, which keeps you as an independent being after you die. So there's an enlightenment purpose behind your sexuality. If you're a master, then you can leave behind food, sex, and everything else. But if you live with a partner, you're encouraged to practice the Tao. And part of practicing the Tao is strengthening these in your daily life, and then semen retention in your sexual life. Because that semen builds your Jing, and your Jing is the foundation for your spirit too. And that's why you have these tales of the Chinese empress who had 10,000 lovers and then became an enlightened spiritual master. Because she knew how to draw the Jing from all of her lovers. Those are tales. Or you hear about the two monks that went to the brothel and they used all their charity money to satisfy all the prostitutes, and then that was their service. So there are these tales of people using their sexuality either for enlightenment or service. For our Western ears, it just sounds like nonsense, right? But there is something to it. So what about the woman? Does the woman need to breathe in her Jing or not? What does the woman do with her fluids? Anybody have a guess? So because of the woman has a kind of inner experience of the fluids, she does not have to practice retention. But what she can do is sexually do the same thing as the man, is bring the Jing essence up to her mind. So that part is similar. But because of the way she's constituted, the whole purpose of the man stimulating or taking care of her sexually is that she brings forth all these Jing fluids and reabsorbs them. So the woman is in a really superior position. So the Taoists are clear that it's the man that's actually the weaker link. And he must be trained in retention and as his goal to make sure that she's fully blossoming energetically. And she's also supposed to practice, of course, the breathing exercises and the proper diet, everything that goes with that. If you'll notice, the Chinese have a certain order. It goes lungs, kidney, heart. Why do you think it's lungs, kidney, heart? So when you're breathing deeply and regularly, there's less of a chance for you to be distracted or nervous or feel bad, right? So the Chinese understood if your breathing is out of whack, you cannot really be spiritually present. So the lungs, the breathing was cultivated as a way of a kind of psychological health. And that's also a way you can start your Taoist practice, is you breathe with your partner. So you'll see all these workshops, tantric workshops, where everybody's breathing, but don't get fooled. Really, the purpose there is to connect with your partner in slow breaths, slowing your system down so you enliven your skin, you enliven your whole body, you bring consciousness. So everything they do is bringing awareness to every part of your body. That's why there's a consciousness of this Wei Qi, Yin Qi, etc. It's about being really cognizant of how important touch is. And the goal eventually, of course, is to have your whole body alive and to spend as much time touching each other as possible. Why? Because remember, the Tao is always energy and movement. So when you're making love and you're exchanging fluids, you're exchanging Jing, that's increasing your health. And that's why you end up living long. But if you have dissipative sex or eating habits, where you're always tired and you're always kind of just whatever, that goes against the Tao, because that's resistant. So your sexuality should be as natural. You get together at 6 and you take a break at 7, then you contemplate the moon at 9 and you make love again at 10. So for the Taoist, it's a never-ending process. If you don't know what to do, make love. When in doubt, make love. That is why the man retains his semen. So he's always in love with his partner. He's always ready. And that, the age of Viagra, right? That's obviously not the case. So there's something to that. Going back to the lungs, breathing puts you back into your body. And then for the Taoist, the breathing stimulates kidney function. So if you're not breathing correctly, you might have a really hard time relaxing and accessing your kidney energy. So what is so important about the kidneys? Anybody know in the Taoist medicine? What are the kidneys responsible for in Taoism? It's actually good to know. They are the source of your sexuality. Kidneys are kind of, right, they're these special organs, and sexual organs too. They're, usually when you die, right, you can die of kidney failure, kind of when you give up on life. But when treated positively, your kidneys actually, your adrenals are kind of related to fear. So as you breathe and you give up your fear, your kidneys kick in, and then your sexuality kicks in. So they understood that you move from your breathing into your kidneys, into your liver being the seat of your thinking and blood, right? And then into your heart. So you go from breathing to making sure, you have enough water, and then getting your organs to harmonize. And they give a certain order, which is not so important for now. But let me just get back to Rule 6. One of the questions, so with all this in mind, let me just ask, any questions about the mechanics so far? So the preparation for your sexuality is in your food, in your breathing, in your cleansing, and charging, meditative or whatever.
Oh, I wanted to make one comment. on the semen retention.
Mm.
There, the acupuncture classes I took, like the instructor was going down the list of all these classical indications for all these acupuncture points, and so he was listing, like, just the translation in English of like what's in all the ancient the ancient Chinese texts. And for a number of these points, spermatorrhea is listed, like just like basically leaking semen, not during sexual intercourse, but like during normal activities during the day. And they always kind of made a joke about it, but apparently it was a big deal, because it came up time and time again, and the instructor would always laugh about it. It was like, I'm just saying this because this is just what's in the classical Chinese text. But he's like, whatever.
So it's considered what if it leaks? Good or bad?
Well, I mean, it's bad because, there's like, well, if a person has spermatorrhea, well, Chinese medicine is all based on the individual, not just, spermatorrhea, do these points. But bad. So like a lot of these points have spermatorrhea listed as a classical indication for needling or stimulating the point.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end, especially with the work with my actual teacher, talking about what a healthy person of the future is going to look like. Any other questions or points? Good. So when you get started, the Taoists, they're kind of funny. So they recommend, if you're a male, you don't want to get too sexy of a female, because then you'll have trouble with your semen retention. That's actually how some of the texts start out. So they recommend having a female who's a little bit heavy, right? Not too skinny, and all of these other qualities, which today kind of sound absurd, right? Because we don't, it's like, wait, you can't help who you fall in love with. But in their practicality, right, the Chinese were talking, they have a little bit, of a too practical streak. So the sexuality, they don't really have romantic love. That's not how they work. And there isn't a lot of talk of love in the Taoist texts. So either it was taken for granted and they just didn't name it, or it's really that old, because romantic love really starts with the troubadours, right? So it might be difficult maybe for us to identify with some of their very scientific sounding judgments. But once you choose your partner, in a similar vein like Barry Long, the Taoist says the man's job, and the woman's job for that matter, is to start at the periphery. So when you make love, you're massaging each other's feet and hands. You never go for the actual torso area. You always start from an extremity, and then you work your way. Because if you know your pressure points, whether it's liver or, all of those, it's much better to press on your kidney points of your partner, especially the one on the shin, and to start there, to warm each other up and to get flowing first as a preparation. And then the Taoists have a list, which I'm not going to include today, of how you know your partner's ready. They're actually very scientific about it. So the woman has to look like this, the man has to look like that, and don't rush it. So pressure point and massage is the beginning of sexuality. Again, it's not in your head. It's not in the fantasizing. The goal, again, is to have contact as long as possible. And for the man, it's opening up certain glands in the woman, one being under her tongue, the other being on her breasts, and the third one being in her vagina. And as long as those secrete, they call it the three libations, as long as the man is feeding off those, there is the true exchange of jing, which is beneficial to his health. So in order to understand Taoist sexuality, if you see a picture of it, it looks like whatever, normal sexual play. But the Taoists have measurements. So there has to be a certain fluid that's excreted from the mouth, under the tongue and the breasts. And that is what nourishes them. And that they look for in each other. And so the skin and these fluids, the prolongation of the sexual contact is the most important thing. In order to encourage that, they develop different positions and rhythms. So that's when you hear like a 5 shallow, 1 deep, 9 shallow, 1 deep. The Chinese developed those rhythms or positions for no other reason than to prolong the sexual encounter. And because the vagina actually has reflexology points. So the reason why you want to be inside the vagina in different angles is to help the woman to release any kind of emotional stuckness. Does that sound familiar? You guys have seen the reflexology thing where you have like kidneys here. The same thing exists inside the vaginal cavity. It's not very developed in the United States. So where you see these stupid books in Barnes and Nobles, those sexual positions are not for fun in that sense. They are for health. And each sexual position has a certain point of reference. So the more you would read, the more you would understand that you're activating something else, or you would become intuitive in that fashion and help your partner to release certain stuck energies. And that was actually very much an experience in myself. As you develop this prolonged sexuality, you can actually start to feel where you're stuck and then trust your partner to apply pressure in different points of your body. So the intimacy also leads to a type of empathy, connection, which you can't have if you're just having typical prescribed Western sex. So back to the whole goal, where the man is looking for ways to slowly heat up the water of the woman, right? Because man is yang, he's fire. He's heating her up slowly and naturally, while not overexciting himself. Her job is to keep him cool, but active. And so that's the strategy of all Taoist practitioners. It's to make the man competent in bed and honest. So he's not there to do his business, but now his business has many different levels of attending, including his own physical health. Good. Any questions about that? Any embarrassing questions about that?
Yeah, Mark, you were mentioning those 3 organs. What about the heart?
The heart, well, according to their 5, so you have lungs, kidneys, liver, and then heart. And then, what's the last one? Did I write it down?
Spleen.
Spleen. Thank you. So you have the spleen, right? Or some people say pancreas. And it makes sense. If you get in touch with your breathing, right? That's the necessary foundation. Then you have to be well, what's the word? Hydrated. And then once you're well hydrated, your liver kicks in, and then your heart. So you have a foundation. if your heart is just all over the place and you have confusion in your sexuality, you don't know, do I like this person or not? With Barry Long and even Taoism, the prerequisite is so different. You can't pick up someone in a bar and they say to you, I'm a Taoist master. You're going to have a good time tonight. That's like, what? And that's what people do, right? They sell themselves as, I don't know, some kind of Taoist master, and they're having one night stands, and it's unthinkable. It's completely stupid. You don't know shit. And that's the problem. That's what they're promoting, especially in that. I don't know if you know the Muir couple. There's the Ghost and Mr. Muir. They run tantric workshops all over the United States. And these people take drugs. They recommend ecstasy to get the woman to relax. Right? So it's a whole schmuck circus out there. And it goes completely against what these people are talking about. So I do recommend, if you're interested, not only the Barry Long, but this book is a gem. And the guy who wrote it is really nice. You can email him. And it's actually really good English. He's an awesome writer. Like, his prose are so beautiful. And it is a little bit dense. And some of the stuff might be, for those in anthroposophy, a little bit superficial on the diet stuff. But he dedicated his life to learning. And all of the techniques, like for semen, like if I were to recommend anything for you guys today, is the semen retention. That's the hardest thing to learn. Anybody can go, if you don't like Taoist stretching, you can go to a yoga class, Bikram yoga or something like that, right? There's all these different things you can do.
What do you think of Montauk Chia?
He comes out of that tradition. So he's a kind of an expert. I haven't read his book in a while, but I thought this was enough in terms of Taoist stuff. I think he'll also focus more on the energetics than other people. But my critique of Barry Long and of the Taoist is, well, that was going to be kind of the third part of the lecture. Does anybody need a quick little break? Or are you okay to go? This last part might be 15 minutes at most.
Either way, if it's not too long.
Okay.
It's interesting what you were saying about the Taoists just going into the bar and picking someone up. It almost sounds like that that they would be more predisposed to that versus like a Barry Long, where you're really ending into love. Again, just because of the way some of these Taoist teachings come across as being so practical. You know, it's just like, okay, it's like a massage, you know, start at the extremities, build the energy. It's almost like you have a gym partner or something, you know.
I'll be honest with you. I had a Taoist teacher, and I just think it's part of the times. And just men are corrupt. You know, they had real gifts. Like, they could put their fingers on the top of your head and make you orgasm. You know, what? How is that good for anybody? You know, if you don't let people do their own work. So what they do is they do their little parlor tricks, and they have capacities. I mean, they can climb into your body and turn you into a puppet, you know, if you allow them, of course. But
yeah,
so yeah, there's a lot of abuse
that
of
would
power.
kind of be a worst case scenario, but I mean,
well, these I don't think are the worst case. I think this is anybody who has gifts and they're men. They're easily corruptible. In the Taoist system, if they're a real Taoist practitioner, not at the highest level, they believe that all energy is there for them. They steal it from trees, they'll steal it from you. But I imagine in China, it was couched. Like, even here in the book by Reed, he says, your 5 principles, Chinese principles: benevolence, honesty, and courtesy. So these guys are obviously not practicing benevolence, because do no harm, right? So as those go out the window with a lot of, and it's the same thing in Hawaii with a lot of male healers. It's just icky.
And there's so many stories in the United States of like different Eastern teachers, whether it's yoga or meditation, where, they sexually take advantage of all these women. And these
Yeah.
women don't know what happened to them. I mean,
Right.
like the Bikram guy was one,
Yeah. Well, also they don't, in their culture, that doesn't happen. So Bikram would be revered, so no one would touch him. But in the United States, people throw themselves like at rock stars. And then he doesn't know how to handle it because he doesn't come from a culture where you say, come on, grow up. I'm not your partner. So, yeah, so it's interesting. He doesn't have that problem in India, but he has it here, right? So that's the fascinating thing. But it all breaks down to moral responsibility. You don't learn. The reason why a lot of us don't have any kind of spiritual powers is because we're so immature and irresponsible, right? So, but in terms of, I think Barry Long, I think you're right. It's kind of hard to abuse love because you're not, Barry Long's technique. You're not out there to score or titillate women or vice versa. Nobody's manipulating anyone. Where are you going to go? You're completely visible. What I do like both of these paths is the eye contact, the staying completely awake, the feeling into each other. That made a big difference than how things often go in our society, where people are really not sure, how can I be more loving? And I think at least Barry and the Taoists answer that. How can I be more loving? By showing up and making love in the kindest way possible. The last part of the workshop is what happens when things go well. And that's the part I think, because I had a teacher who monitored me, I was able to do okay in this arena. So if you're making love, what are some of the results? And then
Can I back up a minute?
yeah, sure.
I think Montauk Chia talks about it, but do any of these other people talk about this idea of actually orgasming without ejaculation?
Yeah, it's not a big deal. If you practice the Taoist path with the semen retention, you can do it fairly quickly. It's just you don't believe you're doing it because you have another, not you, but one has another image of what that means.
What do you mean doing it?
When you have the orgasm without
just
no ejaculation. Yeah. Yeah. So what ends up happening as you keep collecting energy in your body when you're making love and you're practicing semen retention, the pleasure and the energy buildup, you'll actually have a non-ejaculatory orgasm. But it's not a big deal. And it can happen without any sexual penetration. They're usually kind of like grace moments where you're like, oh, I can do this without any penetration. How is that possible? And the reason is because you've been bringing love into your body. You care about someone else other than yourself in bed. And as a man, it's wonderful because, if it's like all the so-called performance anxiety, there's no performance anymore because you're there to make love. So there's so many things like paradigm switch, things that happen that are inexplicable, like beforehand. But you got to stick with the practice. It could take a week, it could take 10 years. Everybody's different. The key is to get out of your head. If you get out of your head, you keep forcing. So let's say when you're intimate with someone, there's a tendency to start imagining things. It's normal, right? Some people go as far as imagining another person, which I think is not very nice, but it happens, right? Eventually, you keep forcing yourself up, your awareness into your heart, into your head, into your crown chakra. You keep forcing that up. You have to remind yourself. And as soon as you do that, you stay there. And that's when the bliss starts to start, because you're getting out of your head, out of your genitalia. You're remaining in your heart connection. And so one of the first results that you have is you have this blissful opening. So what I did is I used both of those systems, but I also did a system that I thought was good for me, which was affirmations. So I made a promise my partner, we couldn't sleep together unless we worked on affirmations for half an hour. Like, I love you, I love myself, I am safe, I love you. To say that, because normally you only say those words for the person you marry or something like that. But to be completely vulnerable was for me the big step. And then doing empathic exercises, connecting heart to heart, stomach to stomach, crown to crown, to feel each other before we engaged in the sexual act. So I thought that in some ways was a little bit more effective than the Taoist and Barry Long. So affirmations and connecting energetically. The other thing was, once you make love, I don't think I could have done this without my teacher. Let's say you're making love and extremely pleasurable and wonderful and all of the kind words, and all of the sudden you slam your heart chakra shut. Now, why did you do that? And the reason is because it became so pleasurable, you got scared because you were expanding. And so when we start to, the thing to do is, while you're making love, is keep your awareness on your crown chakra as often as you can, and check yourself to see if any of your chakras are closing even a little bit. It sounds very hygienic or a little bit doctory, but when you're making love, you'll feel your calves tightening. If your calves tighten, that means you're closing down. So the thing to do is stop making love, give a little distance, and reopen your crown chakra and breathe deeply. If you don't do that, you'll slam down your chakra and the pain is awful because you've been so blissfully expanded. Now, this doesn't happen overnight, but as you're practicing, you'll feel the expansion. And the hardest thing to do is to stay open when you or your partner's junk comes up. Fear of abandonment, past life memories, whatever it is. So the healing part is, as you stay open for prolonged periods of time, your stuff is going to come to the surface. And that's where we developed 3 days making love, 3 days resting. 3 days if you make love like this 7 days a week, you'll be divorced in a month because you're not ready to. Let's say your partner wants to kill you during sex. Are you going to take it personally? Well, what kind of partner are you? They're having a release and you caused it because you are loving. So that's why it doesn't really pay to talk about the future of sexuality when we don't even know what's on the table. And that's what I learned from my teacher, that as you shut down, as stuff comes up for you and your partner, you will learn to navigate it by slowly disconnecting, working it out. Like, let's say they get up and they take a shelf and throw it. They're completely filled with rage. You're like, oh my God, we're in the middle of this great sex. Where are you going? That's what you're there for. That's what the true man is. We're trying to prepare. That's what he's there for, to help his wife release. And to help you, of course, release. The difference is, so man is the grounding principle, right? And so as the grounding principle and the protector, he has to become aware that if he brings love into the constellation, all of these things are now on the table. Sounds kind of maybe strange now, but look back to when you had a breakup with someone you really loved. You probably spent an awesome weekend with them, and then by Tuesday you're already fighting. That's signs of release. That's the sign of a really strong, loving sexuality. It's the tough parts that are important. And then what you do is, when you feel this darkness come up, is you just smile. You go, I'm releasing, nobody talk to me. I'm going to go for a walk in the mountains. I'll be back in 6 days, right? Because it's that severe sometimes. And then only in that way can sexuality become a healing practice. The build up to that is a lot of trust, a lot of mistake making, a lot of shutting down. There's also something called courting. Do you know what courting is, anybody? Oh, it's awful. This is how most of us relate. You have two people, and then you send an energetic cord maybe to their forehead. You know, he sends an energetic cord to her vagina. She's always trying to convince him to buy a new house. And then you set up all these cords where you try to force each other to behave. Like if your husband doesn't do what he wants, then you send a cord in his back and he has a back pain. He doesn't know why. Whenever he wants to go hang out with his friends, he gets a back pain. And this is the way we treat it. We do that to our kids. Like if you look at two family members, there's all these cords between family members. And the kids, oh, where did mom go? They'll send a cord to go find you and hook onto you.
I mean,
And
I'm assuming this is all happening unconsciously, right?
Well, yeah, but you know, there's people who know what they're doing. Let's say I really want to control you. I'll cord you in your solar plexus. Now on the surface, right? You don't see that, but you'll feel it. Go spend a day with your parents and really open up. Allow yourself to feel what they do to you or you do to them. So the way to clean cords is to consciously just sit by yourself, retract all of the cords that you send out, and then bring in light to cancel and cut the cords that are coming your way. Now you're so used to living that way, those headaches that you get, those backaches or whatever pains, a lot of that's through cording. Now imagine you're making love to someone, you're having such a good time, you don't want to lose them. So you just cord them. And then all of a sudden you're making love and you feel this really sharp pain in your stomach, like one of those lampreys hooked you. So as you open up, you will feel the cording. And the way to be mature about it is not to tell your partner, stop courting me. You know, it's like, oh, let's do some courting work. Let's call Mark. We'll practice some courting work. I don't court you. Why should you court your partner? I won't let you court me. I don't invite you here so you could court me, right? And that should be your attitude from now on. So I'm going to clean up my cords, and I'm going to ask the angels to cut the cords that are affecting me. Barbara Ann Brennan in her second book has a nice picture of it, of couple. But Barbara Ann Brennan is also kind of a schmuck, right? She doesn't realize these cords are not a good way for people relating. There's a bad way. It's an unhealthy, unfree way. So back to the thesis, as you become more sensitive, you want to clean up your auric space. And then come those meditations I push on you guys all the time. The pranic tube, the EMF.
Well, and the forgiveness sheets.
The forgiveness sheets are the key. The forgiveness sheets, if you're in a relationship and you don't do forgiveness sheets, I don't know how you can stand each other, right? I mean, the relationship's only about doing work. And the forgiveness sheets are this fastest way to stop blaming your partner for how you feel, right? So I did them all through my practice all the time. Stop blaming my partner. It was so important. I think that's why my teacher was so generous with me. I followed her instructions pretty well. But let's see. If I had to have a conclusion, there's a difference between releasing and closing down. Closing down is when you're intimate and you end up going somewhere else, either in your fantasy or you shut down some of your chakric exchange. That's closing down. Release is you're releasing something that comes up that needs to go, whether it's an incorrect idea, past life violence, whatever. So you'll learn to distinguish, wait, I'm releasing right now. I think everybody should stay away from me from a day. Or you're making love and you could tell your partner, you know what, I think you're closing down. Let's take a break. Let's breathe together. Let's reestablish the openness. And some of your partners are going to be hurt by that. They'll be like, you're the one who's closing down. No, you're closing down. And that's part of the struggle, because as you become empathic, sometimes you don't know whether it's you or them, right? And then if you have a tendency to point the finger, there's polite ways. Oh, I think I'm closing down. Or is it you? You know, you learn to try to develop a language of love so you don't sound like a jackass. And you ask your partner, do you feel like you're shutting down? Well, maybe it's me. That's kind of the language of the new sexuality, because you're caretaking, right? You're being honest about what you're experiencing. And just because something comes up while you're having the absolute best expanded lovemaking of your life doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It could just be a release. And yeah, that's the end of my story. Any questions? Any thoughts?
Thank you. So that's what you were meaning when you say what happens when things go well. You were talking about the releases and all that type of stuff.
Absolutely. It's going so well that your body is actually throwing stuff out. That's how awesome your sexuality is. And then let's say like a typical life, you get married, you have a blissful first 3 years, and then the rest of it, you're like, oh, what did I marry this fucking evolutionary dead end, right? And then you realize, oh, we got to go to marriage counseling. I don't know how to talk to my wife, right? And so if we knew from the beginning that our marriage or relationship was about healing work, then we could jump right into the Tantra and speed it up. But if we think we're just supposed to be nice to each other all the time, and that's it, that's okay too. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a fun marriage or relationship where you're just having fun. But like if you're into anthroposophy and stuff like that, I really doubt that's your destiny, just to, you know, live a superficial life on Fifth Avenue, you know, where you have fun. You know, the fun is doing the work, and the honor and the responsibility, the incredible honor of being able to do the work and not pretending you're someone you're not.
I'm glad you mentioned the anthropops, because have you run across anything, any commonalities or insights from Steiner that might dovetail or support any of this? I mean, he doesn't talk about sex much, really, that I saw.
I heard from my old teacher, Florin, that he was forbidden. There's a lot of control around him.
Well,
What?
and I
Would you
also
say
heard,
I'm sorry, you're saying that Steiner forbid talking about sex?
No, they forbid him. They didn't want to hear it.
Oh.
I heard that one of the things that he was saying is that because of the way we are constituted in this time, that if he started to speak on the topic of spirituality, sexuality, we just completely misunderstand it. And it would actually then be used to harm other people. Like as a people, we weren't ready for it at this stage yet. Like the real spiritual depth of it. Yeah.
I think if I didn't meet the healer, there's too much going on not to have someone who knows a lot at the head of the ship. Does that make sense? So there needs to be a kind of like a new Rudolf Steiner in sexuality.
Well, related to this, it's and something that Dr. Robert Gilbert with the Vesica Institute talks about, kind of harps on all the time, is it's not a coincidence that in How to Know Higher World, Steiner did not give any exercises for the lower chakras.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole nother talk about the chakras, like coming from Noah. The isolation of the chakras is over. It's been over for 2 decades, so we could talk about that some other time.
What's that mean?
So people treat the chakras with certain colors in an isolated fashion, and basically that's just antiquated. Humanity's already moved beyond that. So the best, if you're really interested, the best way to start is with the EMF spiral sweep meditation. It turns all your chakras gold color, and then they become one organism eventually. So when you make love consistently in a loving way, what ends up happening is the chakra organization of you and your partner, it starts to twist and then becomes one. Like this type of, pictures that you see, that disappears and they meld because you're no longer isolated in your thinking. So when you get out of your head, the first thing that happens is your liver pools. So you'll be making love and it feels like someone squeezing your liver. You start to cry and cramp. So let's say for my partners at the time, they were like, "Oh, are you okay?" And I was like, and it's horrible. Like it must have happened, I don't know, 100 times for a number of years. It was really painful. And once that clears, you're good. Your liver needs to clear. So that's something to look forward to. But yeah, there's a lot of things have changed. Maybe I'll have to talk about that next time around.
Well, much easier to talk about these days than it was a century ago, I imagine.
I think so too. I think if Steiner had told the anthroposophists they could have, let's say, I don't know, fucked their way to enlightenment, they would have thrown his books out the window, right? I mean, so.
But meanwhile, I heard some of them were doing it behind the scenes, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, Germany was a free country.
Talk about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So, no, I mean, Germany is a relative. If you look at like a history of syphilis, I believe, turn of the century Vienna was struck with syphilis terribly, like for 100 years, right? So people weren't getting married till like their 40s or 30s. There's all sorts of problems that came if you study venereal disease in Europe. Like it was a real problem, like with Churchill's father. But anyway, if you're into that, you can see why some generations are really don't want to talk about sexuality because the risk is death. So that's something that we no longer really relate to in the same way. But I don't know if that's the only reason why. I just heard that Steiner, nobody wanted him to talk about sexuality, basically.
Well, and I would imagine that, again, you're more likely to spread STDs if you're coming from this unspiritual sexual place. I mean, because you're just